We now have a very special panel. So let me ask our panelists to come up. Secretary George Shultz, President Janet Napolitano, Tom Steyer, and Arun Majumdar. Please come to the stage. And to introduce this panel, let me ask Martin Herman, the CEO and founder of 8 Minute Energy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the clean energy community. I first would like to take the opportunity to thank you all for your hard work and dedication for a clean planet and all the work you did. I'm truly honored to be here today, participate at this conference, and share some of my thoughts on solar photovoltaic. I'm the CEO of 8 Minute Energy. We're a developer of solar photovoltaic power plants here in the United States. We're the largest independent developer, and we're based in California. We recently branched out into India and Latin America. Please allow me to give some personal background on how I got into photovoltaics. I had a semiconductor company, sold it in 2001. That company happened to be in Germany, and in 2001 in Germany, for the next 10 to 12 years, photovoltaics ramped up big time. Over time, it occurred to me that a solar module is a semiconductor device. And my experience in semiconductor has been that any device you produce has this inherent cost regression dynamics built in. And we have all seen this with personal computers, with cell phones, communication bandwidth, etc. So it was only consequent for us to start a company in 2009 here in California that is benefiting from the cost regression. And so for us, it wasn't a surprise that the prices of solar PV is continuing to drop. In fact, we use this to establish ourselves as the price leader in California, which for the last 5 years has probably been one of the most competitive markets in the world and one of the most successful in driving down the cost of solar aggressively. So in the meantime, we have built up a portfolio of 1,500 megawatt and secured about a 15% market share. And we're now branching out into other markets. I'm also proud to announce today that we have a power plant in Southern California under construction, a 200 megawatt plant, which is the first power plant that is beating fossil fuel prices here in the United States. And that is a significant accomplishment, not just for us, but also for our industry. And other solar developers have made announcements for markets such as Mexico, India, Middle East, and other markets. And I think we should take a moment to celebrate that major milestone, also recognizing that we're standing on the shoulders of a lot of people that dedicated their last decades to the point where we are today. So this is very exciting for us. I also want to congratulate the corporations that have been announcing the ambitious renewable energy targets, and very glad to see the progress that they made. We are working with a number of them to customize solutions, and we look forward to work with further corporations in deploying latest technology, as well as demonstrate our price leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, the world came together in December last year in order to develop a new path for a cleaner planet and a cleaner future. We as a company, 8 Minute Energy, as well as other companies in our industry, are committed to do our share, to use latest technology and whatever else we have in our might in order to contribute our part to a cleaner future. And so we're looking forward to a future where the energy produced is all clean, affordable, and abundant. Please now help me in welcoming Arun Majumdar, who is the J. Precourt Professor at Stanford University. He will be leading what's bound to be an exciting panel called Towards a Clean Energy Economy. Thank you very much.
There's no question we have a dream team right out here in this panel. And we are sitting in California. I think there's a lot of countries represented out here. And a lot of countries are wondering how to navigate this new reality of decarbonizing the energy system, because for the last 250 years, the world has gone in a different direction, and we are just changing, moving the ship turning it around. And people are looking for models of excellence. California has the 7th largest GDP in the world, which includes the US and the EU. Now that it's decided to address energy and climate change, it can really move the global needle. Within the US, California has really led the way, and the people out here had a lot to do with that. And so we're here to learn what are the lessons learned from California that can be used elsewhere. So let me start with Secretary President Napolitano. The University of California system, it is the best public university in the world.
Here, here.
And it is big.
It is
And the scale matters.
scale matters.
And when you came in 2013, within a few months, you made some commitments. And the commitments was to decarbonize or to make it carbon neutral, the whole UC system by 2025. And you pledged $1 billion from your pension fund, if I understand it right. And as a pensioner, I'm really proud that University of California has done that. And it's now part of the Breakthrough Energy Coalition as the only institutional investor.
That's right.
Tell us your vision. Why did you do that?
We did it because we are a public research university, and we combine all the elements necessary to have a strategy designed to move the needle on this important issue. It's research, and research of the most fundamental type into new science, new technologies. It's education and getting the next generation prepared to take on the mantle, and also education by way of changes in behavior, the kind of changes that are necessary to move the needle. And it's about mission. And we believe, as the largest and best public research university in the United States, we owe it to leverage all of our parts. It's 10 campuses, it's 5 huge academic health centers, it's 3 national laboratories, et cetera, to leverage all of those together to take on big challenges. And energy, of course, is top amongst that list. And so we set an aggressive goal very early, carbon neutral by 2025. And the only reason I mention that is for those of you who are dealing with large institutions, it can be a government, it can be a large agency, it could be another large university or business. Whatever it is, large institutions require simply stated goals in order to mobilize and get everyone pointed in the same direction. And that's what we've done at UC. And so it's a lot of movement to solar. We're just about ready to go online with an 80 megawatt solar farm down near the Fresno, California area. That's almost 20% of our power load. It's biomethane, and it's using everything we produce from dining hall waste to everything else to convert, to take the place of fuels like natural gas. And it's new ways of design and construction and behavior, smart buildings, smart systems, smart lighting, all of those things. And then finally, putting our own investment dollars where we think they can help move the needle. And as you mentioned, Arun, that's in investing ourselves in new energy technologies. So that's the role that I think a public university like UC can play.
Terrific. Secretary Shultz. Secretary Shultz and Tom, I want you to go back to 2010. And there was a proposition, Proposition 23, and for those of you who are not from California, this would have overturned the climate legislation, the landmark climate legislation of California. You both got together and led a campaign on no on Prop 23. And Secretary Shultz, you said, you often say this, that you didn't just want to win. You wanted to win big. Tell us why.
Well, we wanted to win big in order to make a forceful point that Californians are serious about this issue, just as Janet said. And remember, when we first started talking, we said we want to win big. And we did. We won among men, among women, among every ethnic group, among every age group. We wiped them out. All right. So it showed where the California body politic was. We had both people running for governor, the Republican and the Democrat, both endorsed us. So we said, this is not a partisan issue, this is a nonpartisan issue. And that's an issue I think we want to come back to.
Yeah, we do.
So Tom, let me ask you. Well, that message was heard loud and clear. Looking ahead, what other messages can we send, not just to the United States, but things that can really impact the world?
Well, I think when we think about the California example, you can look and see what's going on a technology basis, and you can look and see the policies that have been adopted in Sacramento that are arguably the most progressive energy policies in the world, including laws that were enacted last year. But let me say this, behind all of that is a political coalition that George alluded to that is very broad and which is not the coalition that people generally expect when it comes to progressive energy policy. So explicitly it includes organized labor, but it also explicitly includes business. We felt in 2010, when you're talking about energy policy, you're talking about economic policy, unless you can at least break even with businesses, and at this point I feel we're much more than breaking even in terms of business support, it's very hard to argue that you have an economic policy that where business is behind it and believes it will work in terms of job creation and prosperity. So that is one thing that it's important for the world to understand that that kind of coalition is necessary. But in addition, I'd make two other points. One is, in California, who is an environmentalist is not necessarily the person or the people who you might think of. So the number one group from an ethnic standpoint who support environmentalism, progressive energy policies, fighting climate change are Latinos. Number two group, African Americans. Number three group, Asian Americans. So when we thought about the coalition we were going to have, we very much knew that it had to reflect every part of our state and every community in our state.
And we won among every ethnic group.
Yes, we did. And the last thing I'd say is this. When we talk about support for progressive energy, support for fighting climate change, it has to be, the argument has to be brought on a broad basis down to local human issues. What is going to happen in your community? What is it going to mean for jobs? What is it going to mean for the health of the people in your community? What is it going to mean for costs for people in your community? That is how people live their lives. That's how they think about policy, is how is it going to affect the people I love. And it was necessary, and we spend a lot of time making sure that the arguments that we were making were local, human, salient arguments so people could understand why we cared so much.
But I remember our most effective ad, Tom, was the woman who was head of the American Health Association. And she looked like your mother. And she said, be careful of the air you breathe. Okay, mother.
So you talked about really embracing all the communities and having them be part of this in California, and that worked. Secretary Shultz, I have not met anyone who knows the world globally more than you. If you now look at the world and everyone's trying to shift towards a cleaner economy, what is your strategy? What's your global energy strategy?
I will sketch it out, but let me make a couple of points before that I learned out of what's called the Montreal Protocol. In the mid-'80s, we found that a lot of scientists thought the ozone layer was depleting. There were some who doubted it, but they all agreed that if it happened, it would be a catastrophe. So President Reagan was convinced that it was a major problem. And so instead of vilifying the people who were opposed to us, he put his arm around them and said, okay, you have a different opinion, but you do agree it would be a catastrophe if it happens. So let's take out an insurance policy. So that didn't get him on our side, but it got him off our back. And so we managed to put through a successful, as it turned out in the end, the scientists who were worried were right, and the Montreal Protocol came along just in time. So the insurance policy concept I have very much in mind. And second, you have to have a motivation where people think there are really consequences to what's happening, that they can feel and are real. So here's my program for the world in energy. Number one, sustain significant support for energy R&D. This is what Janet was talking about. I say that, underline that, because we've been there. I remember in 1973, I was Secretary of the Treasury, and the Arab boycott came along. So oil prices went up, and everything was scarce, it was wild, and people came in, and they knew I had an MIT background, and they would have ideas about things you could do. So I encouraged it. Price of oil went down, everything stopped. We went through the same thing when we had the Iranian Revolution. Interest starts when we're up, and then everything lose interest when the oil price is down. Now we have been through a significant period where oil and gas prices have been high. And during that period, we've had, I think it's fair to say, the brightest and biggest scientific and engineering effort in this area the world has ever seen. Now oil and gas prices are down. So we have to be sure this doesn't happen again. And this time we have an argument that we didn't have before, namely that the big R&D effort paid off. There are all kinds of things you can point to and say, here are outcomes, it works. And here are prospects that are right there. So let's have a continued strong support and share these ideas. Second, I think you have to set up a major incentive. And I am in favor of a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Try a number like $200 a ton. That'll get people's attention. And I argue to my so-called conservative friends, I said, look, you're complaining that the government is telling you do this, do this, do this. Forget it, let's get rid of that stuff. Just put a price out there and let people react to the price. But let's be a little smart and be sure it's revenue neutral. And you do that by having the revenues flow into a single place that's publicized. And I would have it administered by an existing bureaucracy like the Social Security Administration that takes in money and pays it out. When it gets to a certain point, pay it out. Say to everybody with a Social Security number, that's a big number, people, and have on the check your carbon dividend. So I get a check for $3,000, what the hell? It's a good program. Now, people will say, if the United States does things and other countries don't, what about it? Well, here's the way I would handle that problem. I would say we put a border tax on to tax the carbon that is being brought in. And that money goes part of the pot and is distributed. And if a country says, hey, why doesn't that money come to my citizens? I say, it's easy. Put in a revenue carbon tax in yours, and you can have the money. So it's an incentive to spread this thing around. But I think if you let the number go high enough, and you should, you can get people's attention, and you get action.
So a carbon price, revenue neutral carbon tax, you talked about R&D.
Make it revenue neutral by distributing it to people.
People.
It's not a slush fund.
Right, and then you investment in R&D. I think a lot of people around the world, as they transition to a cleaner economy, are looking for investments, financing, because, well, last year we have globally about $300 billion of investment in renewable energy. Tom, you've been in the financing world. How do we unleash capital? And for energy, as you know, we need long-term low-cost capital. How do we unleash $1 trillion in this business?
Well, I actually have a simple way of thinking about investment. And I know that sometimes in the energy area, people think that there is a dearth of investment dollars, and that in particular, there's a stage at which, the so-called valley of death, where it's very hard to raise sufficient dollars. But to me, the answer to all of the investment questions comes down to revenues. And revenues come down to customers who can react and commit them. So when you think about when there has been disruptive technologies, the example I like to use is cell phones, where contrary to the expectations of virtually everybody, cell phones completely disrupted telephony in the United States between 1990 and 2000. And they were, because consumers were the decision makers, and you could have a cheaper mobile service, virtually everybody adopted them, and we had hundreds of millions of cell phones, more than people had expected in the mid-'80s. The key was revenues and customers. And when we think about energy, the reason that people worry about revenue dollars, and that is what is going to enable financing, is if there is some intermediary that is going to prevent the ultimate customer from adopting even a better or disruptive technology. So when we think, and the question here, if you think back, I'll just make 2 quick points. One is, if you think back about the companies in clean tech, which are famous, which have done new things, which people think of as huge successes, the ones that immediately come to mind, Tesla, Solar City, a couple of the others, all of them have customers who can make a decision quickly and can choose to move without institutional barriers. So when we think about electricity as, are we in fact, is the answer to this going to be a much greater electrification of society through clean generation? If that's true, then we're going to need to make sure that the purchasing dollars to new technologies and new investments are quickly available, or it's going to put a huge crimp in the style of those new technologies, because the companies are going to have to last longer during a very long decision-making process. And it may be that the intermediaries who are making the decision on behalf of the ultimate customers are going to have a different incentive structure. So either we get directly to the customers and the dollars, which will make financing much more available, or we change the incentive structures for the intermediaries to reflect society's needs, which will also free up investment dollars.
Secretary Shultz, you had a comment?
I want to give you a tiny example of what you're talking about. I have solar panels on my house down at Stanford. That's a place down south of here.
Small college in
right.
Palo Alto.
And I've long since paid for them by the money I've saved on my electric bill. And those panels generate more electricity than my electric car uses. So I'm driving on sunshine. My fuel bill is 0. What's not to like?
Secretary Napolitano.
Well, what I was going to say is, all the incentives need to align so that the dollars get where they need to. It's going to require taking some risk at some part by investors in some respects. With respect to the carbon tax idea, which politically could be difficult to achieve on a national basis, but there's nothing that prevents smaller units from having their own internal way of taxing carbon. For example, it's not outside the realm of possibility as we look toward a big multi-part system like a university achieving carbon neutrality, that we begin internally looking at something that equates to a carbon tax as a way of aligning incentives at a larger scale than you can, even with the most ambitious use of some of the things I've spoken about.
Shultz.
I don't know whether Ernie is here or not, but I chair his energy initiative. Where are you? And you remember, Ernie, I think it was a year or so ago, I suggested to MIT that they put in a revenue-neutral carbon tax. And the president liked the idea, and the vice president for research liked the idea. She liked it in part because the revenues would be revenue neutral by giving them to her to dispense. But at any rate, I understand MIT now has a sort of revenue neutral carbon tax in effect. And I think you're absolutely right. People start putting these things, they learn how to measure carbon, they learn how to do this and that, and it can grow.
That's indeed.
But there is something else going on here that I think Janet's point and Janet's example actually show, which is the UC system is going to be carbon neutral by 2025. And they're going to do that because they think it's the right thing to do. They want to be leaders, they have high ideals and values, and they want to live up to those values and exemplify them for everyone else. So I give her and I give the UC system incredible respect for announcing that and making it happen and showing the rest of us what we can do. But there's another point. For the society as a whole to work, you've put in kind of a goal and a rule that what you're going to do. As a society, if we're going to do it, we're going to have to decide together to put in that kind of goal and that kind of rule to determine how everybody, not just the most high-minded, the most responsible, but everybody in society is going to be on a level playing field, playing by the same rules, and achieving the outcome that is good for all of us. So ultimately, when our society wants to make this kind of change, we're going to have to choose to do it together through a democratic process.
Well, and it can be done in California. Arun, going back to your introductory comments, is a great example. If you think about air quality in California, post-World War II, Los Angeles and London were probably the two most polluted cities in the world. Changes were made, some at the governmental regulatory level, some at the societal level. Some were changes in consumer behavior. But changes were made, and now you can see the results. And those are results in a lifetime. There is nothing to suggest that we can't, if we deploy the same kind of concentration, persistency, consistency, and clarity, we can't make the same kind of change today.
Let me switch the subject a little bit and talk about adaptation, because I think climate change is not only happening, it's accelerating. Sea level rise is accelerating. In your document that both of you are involved in, Risky Business, you pointed out what it could happen within the United States, various state level. And you had a very nice comment, which I'm going to quote. Talking about climate change in terms of US averages is like saying my head is in the refrigerator, my feet are in the oven, so overall I'm average. I would say, let me extrapolate that, saying that since the feet are on the hot side, we may be being hit below the belt right now. And so the adaptation part, I think every country is trying to figure out how to adapt to climate change. And Madam Secretary, you were the Secretary of Homeland Security when you had a big disaster, Superstorm Sandy.
That's right.
And we are likely to see these extremes happen again, and more often, frankly. What were the lessons learned? And I'll just give you the little preface on that. Secretary Chu is going to come and talk about it. He wrote a just wonderful description of a memo on his lessons learned and how we could move forward within the Department of Energy, on other places, how to prepare for it. What were your lessons learned from that, and how can we use that to prepare for adaptation?
Well, first, Superstorm Sandy was the largest, most severe landfall hurricane in the United States, besides Katrina. Sandy covered a geographic area about the size of Western Europe. It came right into New York Harbor with all of the infrastructure and all of the systems that the United States has headquartered there. You almost couldn't imagine a worse congruence of factors than Sandy. There were a lot of things we were dealing with, and the reason I was involved as the secretary is because the Secretary of Homeland Security, FEMA reports to the Secretary of Homeland Security, storms of national significance are all coordinated by the Secretary of Homeland Security. So there's a major institutional role. So I lived with Sandy for a long time, but some of the lessons learned, for example, people need to understand what it takes to live without electricity. Because Superstorm Sandy resulted in whole swaths of the population of the northeastern United States being without power because the poles and the power lines had all been torn down, eradicated. We were actually flying in teams from California, among other places. We got the Department of Defense to loan us some of their huge military transport planes. We loaded them up with power crews from California, from other countries, from Canada, anyone we could find who had a truck and a crew. We got them over to the northeastern part of the United States, and quickly, so that power could be restored. What happens when you live without power? When you live without power and you live in a high-rise and you're dependent on the elevator because maybe you're elderly or disabled or you've got other reasons, that's a big issue. So then you got to be able to get help to those people because they can't get out. So you have those kinds of consequences. You have the fact that fuel and cargo ships containing fuel could get into New York Harbor because we dredged it very quickly after the hurricane. We could fill those big fuel tanks right along the harbor. We could load gasoline trucks to get it to gasoline stations through the Northeast corridor. But the gasoline stations didn't have electricity, and therefore nobody could pump gasoline out of the actual gas pumps into cars. And so we had gas lines that looked something like the Arab oil embargo from the 70s that you mentioned.
And that makes a dent on people.
And it certainly does. And so figuring out alternative sources of energy, of fuel, of people truly incorporating within their own personal sense what it takes to be emergency prepared and how you factor in lack of electricity for an extended period of time was a key challenge of Sandy.
Well, ladies and gentlemen.
Let me just mention something
sure.
in connection with that. If you have a system that's not dependent on the grid, but the delivery of gas, you can keep your electricity going, and that actually happened. Bloom Energy electricity was the one place that kept going.
That's right.
So thinking about ahead of time and saying, why do we want to be so dependent on this grid? Isn't there some way we can lessen that is important.
Another important lesson, indeed.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we could have spent another hour discussing many aspects of this energy and climate, but alas, we have come to the end because of the schedule. But this has been a fabulous discussion. Congratulations to all of you for all the things that you have done and you're doing and you will do in the future. Let's give them a big round of applause.